Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlin.
And I'm Ben Lander.
And thank you very much for joining us today on our second episode of our comeback, and also the first episode since my triumphant haircut.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it wonderful? The barber that I go to see is phenomenal.
It's a live-in barber?
It's a live-in barber, yes. How many people have a live-in barber? It's such a luxury. I have a live-in barber. Yeah, anyway, we're not going to say anything more than that. People, I think, will figure it out. So welcome very much. Thank you very much for joining us here for Trinity Talk Live. For those of you that are new to the program, basically what we do here is it's the capstone says it all, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. We try to talk about whatever people out there in the world are talking about, but we do it, or try to do it, keeping Christ first, from the perspective of keeping Christ first and foremost. If you joined us last week, we did have a little experiment for the first time. Over to Ben's left, over here, your hand's already off the screen. Come back. There you go. Last week we had it set up so the YouTube comments were appearing over there, but we are streaming live both on YouTube and Facebook on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. Part of the show here is audience involvement. You are invited to join in the conversation, and the way you do that is by posting a comment, either in the YouTube live chat or in the comments section to the Facebook live video. First thing you will notice, if all the technology works as it's supposed to, is when you do that, it will appear in this box. Oh, I'm pointing at Ben's head again. No, not in your head. No. In that box over there, your comment will appear on the screen. And that is true whether it's YouTube or Facebook. No matter where you post the comment, it should appear over there. Should be in the emphasis word. We'll see if it actually works. Regardless, I also have both Facebook and YouTube open here on this lovely screen in front of me. So if you do have a question, comment, whatever it may be, please go ahead and post it. I will take note of it here, and if I don't, my lovely wife, our producer behind the scenes there, will make sure that I do. And as soon as there is a natural point in the conversation to take it up, we will read your comment, we'll respond, we'll answer, whatever it may be, because we want this to be audience participation. So please join in. We do have some hot topics to talk about today. And normally, before the show starts, Ben, you and I sit down and we talk about who's going to read which story. We forgot to do that today.
Yeah.
And so since I'm the one talking right now, I'm just going to say, hey, Ben, why don't you read our first story?
All right, we're going to jump out of the gate with our first hot topic. This is, I'm sure, something you may have heard about over the last couple of days, but a popular social media platform, Parler, or is gaining popularity, called Parler, has just been removed by Google. The headline here on CNBC is where we got this article from. It says it's popular with Trump supporters, but it's removed from the App Store for Android, and it talks about some of Google's reasoning for removing this app, the social media, basically, effectively, in that it violated the Google terms of service, stating that it was inciting violence. Because the premise behind Parler, it's a social media app where it really limits the censorship. They at least promote it in such a way that people can say whatever they want. Their tagline is, if you can say it on the streets of New York City, you can say it on our platform. So Google removed them because they require all social media to censor or screen content that would be deemed violent or inciting violence. And that was kind of its main reasoning here. Now, this article from CNBC, whenever it was released, actually more updates have come out since. This was on Friday, but I guess over the weekend also, Parler has been removed from the Apple App Store as well as Amazon, which
their servers host
it. The servers they host it. So effectively, they're kicked off the internet entirely because their servers are no longer being hosted because of these apparent violations of terms of service. What say you?
I realize the flaw in my logic here, Ben. I should have, since I was the one that was controlling the mic at the start of the show, I should have introduced the story, because then that would have meant the way we weren't run things, you would have had to be the first to comment on it. I shot myself in the foot in that regard by having you read the story. Now I need to be the first one to comment on it. Well, here's
Passing the book.
passing the $10. Anyway, I'm sure we can find something good to donate that to, Ben.
Yes, we can.
Like the food closet. Sorry.
Or story number 4.
Story number 4. Yeah, that's true. Good point. We'll get to there when we get to story number 4. All right, so here's, I actually read a few articles on it, and yeah, you're right. It's Apple, Google, Amazon, they've all taken down Parler in whatever way they were able to do so. And needless to say, the chief executive, Parler chief executive, John, I think it's pronounced Matze or Matz, M-A-T-Z-E, has, put their business spin on this whole thing, and as he should. I mean, he's running a business, and so he's trying to make his money, and so he's basically saying the whole thing is a free speech issue, that they're trying to suppress conservative speech. Of course, the flip side, and what these agencies are saying is like, no, we have terms of service that basically require you to moderate your comments, your platform to a certain extent, to prevent certain things from happening on it, and you're not doing that, and therefore you're violating our contract with you in order for us to continue to provide the services that we're providing. There's so much we could talk about on this.
Yeah.
There really is. I mean, there's the aspect of, is this really an active goal of suppressing conservative speech? I know a lot of people are talking about. Mm-hmm. There's the free contract, the free enterprise aspects to it. Christians all the time will talk about how the fact that a Christian baker shouldn't have to bake a cake for a wedding that they don't agree with on their theological grounds, because we live in a free enterprise system where they're supposed to have that freedom. Well, then doesn't that mean that Amazon and Google, these are private companies, that
technically it's within their rights to do so,
to do the same thing?
Yeah.
Then you get into well, it might be legally right, but what about the moral question? Is it morally right to do what they're doing? And then but here's where I want to start with all, and we can get to all of those topics, and we probably will. But here's where I want to start with, because what I don't want to lose focus on is the Christian perspective. All right, I think we have a tendency to, it's an outrage tendency. There's so much going on in the world today that people are getting outraged about.
Sure. And
we just need to check. It's not to say that righteous anger is not a thing. It is.
Absolutely.
We just need to make sure that we're implementing it properly,
righteously.
Yeah. And here's one thing in one article that we read here that bothered me a little bit, and that were screenshots that were taken of some of the comments on the Parler app. And this is from the article you were citing, show users posting references to firing squads, as well as calls to bring weapons to the presidential inauguration later this month. No Christian should have any part in that.
No.
Period. No Christian should have any part in that. So I guess the question then, and we should soundly condemn that type of thing. The response we've seen from a lot of people, and former Governor Huckabee was one that was quoted in this article, who's basically saying, look, the overwhelming majority of people that are using Parler are perfectly fine folks. They're not doing this type of thing.
Right.
I don't know. Here's the question I had when I was reading those comments, and I'll see what you think about this. Is that missing the point? In other words, yes, you can have a platform where 50 bazillion people are doing the right thing, and 100 people are doing dangerously wrong things. And does the fact that 50 bazillion people are doing the right thing excuse the platform from not policing? Because that's the allegation, that from not policing the 100 that aren't doing the right thing.
Well, so something that comes up in regards to that question frequently as I'm hearing conversation on this is Article 230, Section 230, which says that a platform is not responsible for any third-party content that's hosted to that platform or posted to that platform. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the same Article 230 that protects Facebook and Twitter from its users posting hate speech and just violent rhetoric and all of that. They're not liable. Facebook and Twitter would not be liable for those. Case in point, we'll get to that, I guess, later. The ban that Facebook and Twitter imposed on President Trump himself, because he, with the connection to what happened last Wednesday at the Capitol. So they're not culpable for that. And I guess the claim there is that they took action in moderating that, whereas Parler did not. So are they legally exempt under Article 230 from those 100 or so people, for sake of argument, that are posting violent rhetoric? I'd say they shouldn't be held accountable for what other people post, certainly. Right. I mean, how can they handle that? Now, here's an interesting question. If Parler were to come back to, say, Amazon or whoever who's hosting their servers and say, okay, if we implement a stricter moderation system on our platform, would they then be allowed back onto the Play Store or the Google?
I think if you ask Google that right now, Google's going to say, sure, they would. Whether it's actually going to happen. I mean, I'm a skeptic about things like that.
Yeah.
I think it's probably never going to be enough for them, to be honest with you, by my personal take. I could be proven wrong, But here's the other interesting part of it. But if Parler does that destroy their business model? I mean, they've presented themselves as this option where you can go, that they don't have these moderation restrictions to the degree that these other social media platforms have.
Right.
And so if they are seen to be kind of bowing down to the pressure in this point, would that ruin their business model? And in regard to the legal aspects you were talking about, we talked about this on a show a while ago. I can't remember what the context was exactly, but the difficulty that you have as a social media platform, and why I think Parler is actually probably in the best position of all the social media platforms as far as liability against them, is because there's a distinction between, are you a publisher or are you just like a bulletin board, essentially? If you're just a bulletin board and you don't take any responsibility for what gets put on it and what doesn't get put on it, and you're just open to all callers, then you're not liable for what somebody else puts on there. The moment you start crossing that line into a publisher, like if I'm a book publisher and an author approaches me with a manuscript and I look over that manuscript and I say, yeah, I want to publish this. I'm going to write this. We're going to publish this under the Coughlin Books umbrella.
That
right?
places a stamp of approval.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the weird amorphous middle gray area that social media platforms live in, because they're bulletin boards. I mean, anybody can post, but at what point does the moderation get to the extent that they're essentially publishers? And if they are starting to filter out certain viewpoints, then I think arguably that does put, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram in an even worse position.
Which leads into a touchy question of where's the line between moderation and censorship?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
Actually, two. First, you're referring to bulletin boards. So let's liken this to an actual bulletin board. So a lot of a lot of grocery stores and like the public library and even City Hall and in some towns have bulletin boards that things can be put up on. I'm sure that they have certain moderation
Sure.
that they use for those, and what they allow on those and what they don't. How does that differ?
It doesn't. With that moderation comes the responsibility to check the bulletin board.
Right.
Essentially. To periodically check it to make sure that there's nothing in violation of those terms being posted on it.
Yeah. So, but you're saying that that's the gray area that the social media sits in. Where are they? I mean, if the City Hall is allowed to pull something down because it doesn't fit with what they want to be posted on their bulletin board, for whatever reason, how does that change them into a publisher versus
volume? I mean, the fact
where is the line?
I
know.
Legally, I don't know if there necessarily is a distinction. It's a practical one that, you're not having the volume put on a library physical bulletin board that you are on a social media platform. And so the liability risk is lower. I mean, how many people are going to walk by a library bulletin board that has a flyer that says, let's go beat up so-and-so at 2:00 Saturday afternoon? How many people are you can see that, act on it, whereas you get into a social media setting where you have an audience of thousands or millions, that changes things. And so in principle, I don't necessarily think there is a difference, but just as a practical matter, there's a difference as far as where the case is actually going to come from.
I think the case could be made too, that there's a distinction between, for example, say Facebook and Parler. Parler, well, I've never used it, but supposedly what I've heard is that it doesn't even have an events organization system or anything in there. It's literally basically just like that bulletin board, whereas Facebook has a lot of groups and events that were being used to organize rallies and people coming to
All right.
to the Capitol.
So my second question is, what did you say that the motto was of Parler?
Basically, they said if you can say it in the streets of New York, you can post it on our site.
So if somebody's standing on a corner in New York City with, maybe a poster, I don't know, and they're standing there and they're yelling, telling people to show up at the Capitol.
Okay,
but they'd be approached by the police, I'm sure.
Right, and here's the distinction legally for example, when we're talking First Amendment, all right, and please hear me clearly. First Amendment does not apply to private entities, okay? The First Amendment is a restriction about what the government can and cannot do to you, all right? But it's somewhat, because we're talking about speech and freedoms, it can be somewhat illustrative. And the distinction for First Amendment when you get to this kind of speech is, are you basically speaking, number one, to a receptive audience, and are you advocating imminent lawless action? So if you're saying, hey, I think we should beat up Johnny, 25 years from now, that's not going to fly. If you're saying let's beat up Johnny, and you're talking to Johnny's best friend, and Johnny's best friend in retaliation is going to punch you in the face, again, it's not a receptive audience. But if you're if you're speaking to someone who is likely to listen to what you're saying, and you're saying let's do something illegal and let's go do it now, you've crossed the line, and your speech isn't protected anymore. But there's so many directions we can go on this, but I guess I want to get back to this point though, Ben. So even if we talk about all the stuff we've talked about now, but let's look at it from Amazon's perspective, for example, or let's look at it from Google's perspective, or Apple's perspective. All right, for whatever their business reasons are, they don't want this content. They don't want to be seen as advocating the content that's out there on Parler.
Right.
And so you can tell them that you've got 15 bazillion people doing the right thing and 100 people doing the wrong thing. But contractually, I mean, their options are somewhat limited. I mean, it's not like they can go into Parler and start moderating those comments out they don't want on there. So, I mean, I guess my question is, if you were, because I would like to look at things on both sides, if you were if you were talking to a representative from Amazon who basically, you're right, removed Parler from the web. They said, you're not on our servers anymore, all right? You're speaking to a representative of Amazon, and what do you say to them? I mean, if they come back to you and say, what other choice did I have? I had no other remedy open to me to address this concern of ours. What do you say to them?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Well, so you're saying from the perspective of, I'm placing myself in the perspective of the Amazon employee?
You're talking to an Amazon, you are a person that thinks that you like Parler, you're one of the ones, you're Governor Mike Huckabee, and you're using Parler for the right reasons, and you're approaching an Amazon CEO, and you're saying, I don't think this was fair.
Okay.
And the Amazon, it's like, I agree with you, Amazon CEO, that those people that are advocating for violent action, they're wrong. They shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
The Amazon CEO says back to you, and people out there, if you're watching, you want to answer this in the chat, do so. I'd be interested to hear what your answers are too. The Amazon CEO turns to you and says, what else was I supposed to do?
I guess my question for the Amazon CEO is, what other actions were taken before the immediate removal from the servers? Were they contacted directly about the moderation? Was there any kind of correspondence?
Yeah, and I think that's probably where we get into the he said, she said kind of thing. I think at least with Google, one of the articles claimed that Google had warned them and said they had to institute this moderation. They didn't do that. I'd be willing to bet if we talked to the folks over there at Parler, they would say that didn't happen or that wasn't clearly communicated. So I don't know. But if Amazon had, for example, warned Parler about this beforehand,
then I might be, more inclined to say they've got a case there. That's strong, what other action? Because it goes back to, honestly, one of the stories from last week when World Vision, the one about World Vision, unwittingly supporting a partner who had ties to terrorism. They can't go directly to that partner, to that whatever the group was now, I forget. Their only recourse was to just cut ties with them, would be to cut ties with them. So not that I'm necessarily equating that, but violence, it's violence. So yeah, I see that.
And so I think this is a more interesting and complicated question than, welcome to our society today. Everything's got to be, all the way one way or all the way the other way, it seems. I personally, do I have a problem with them cutting Parler off and removing their servers? I do. I mean, not legally. I think they legally have the right to do it, assuming their terms of service say what they say. But just, as a consumer, I kind of have an issue with that because I do like to have the more options out there. I do tend to think, and maybe we're going to find out as soon as I say this, if YouTube cuts us off or Facebook cuts us off, I do think they over moderate quite a bit. I do think there are things that should be allowed on these platforms in the interest of, the marketplace of ideas that they do cut off. I do see some things getting moderated that I think are because of the viewpoint they're advocating. So I'm very sympathetic to Parler in that regard. But then at the same time, I strongly disagree with the comments and the types of comments that these people are making and using Parler to make. And it doesn't appear that there has been adequate monitoring to prevent that. So,
yeah, and I think I would tend to agree with you, kind of in that middle area. It is concerning for me insofar as what does this mean for the future and what other steps or oversteps, kind of like we were talking about with the lockdowns. How does this just give precedence for over moderation? That's a good term that you use. And well, I mean, even going back to a Christian perspective, kind of looking at the flip side, if I'm talking to the Parler executive saying, this is our business model. From a Christian perspective, though, Jesus tells us to be as gentle as doves, or shrewd as serpents, but gentle as doves. So is it really wise from Parler's business model to have zero moderation because it lends itself to things like this? Or would it be more shrewd to have at least a baseline of not even necessarily moderation, but at least a disclaimer that says we're not responsible in any way for the views on here? But maybe they do need to have some moderation, but at least something.
But that's where you get into them. Where do you draw the line?
Right.
You say we have some moderation. You got to draw a line somewhere,
Yeah.
And that's why you have terms of service. And I think maybe Parler, and I don't know, maybe Parler does have terms of service that they're just not enforcing, or they don't have the personnel, whatever, in order to really detect these things out there. I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of my excuse me, the kind of the complicated issue that I deal with here, because I think the danger we run as Christians is, number one, we get too caught up in our freedoms, and sometimes that almost becomes an idol for us, I think. Yeah, it's great to live in a free country. I love that we live in this free country. I love this country very much. But Jesus is still where my identity is. Jesus is still my top focus, my top priority. And so I can't, if we get so caught up in how unjust it is of what they did to Parler, which it may be, like I said, I think I see arguments on both sides, but we don't address the comments that are being made,
right,
and soundly condemn that, then and say, yes, we agree, those shouldn't be made, and we need to have some kind of solution to prevent any type of incitement from happening, so to protect people's lives. Then we run the risk of, casting Christ in a bad light and putting Christianity in a bad light.
Right.
So there was some other angle I was going to take on this one, but I don't even remember what it was. Maybe we'll come back to it.
We'll circle. They're all kind of tied together this week.
Yeah, the first three stories today you're going to see kind of have a recurring theme that we've got here, or not. I don't know if it's a recurring theme, but there's definitely related ties to them. And this next one is what we're calling, we're like daring YouTube, I guess, maybe to kick. I shouldn't say that.
Careful what you wish for.
I know. Because if they didn't kick us off last time, maybe they will this time. YouTube has announced, this is our second story now, YouTube has announced a new policy. For those of you that are YouTube users, if you have your own YouTube channel, you'll be familiar with the concept of the YouTube strike. If you're not, let me tell you what they are a little bit. YouTube, just like all these other social media platforms we were talking about, has terms of service. All right, they have certain things you're allowed to put on YouTube, certain things you're not allowed to put on YouTube. They have the restrictions. If you're monetized, like we now are, thank you for everybody helping us get to 1,000 subscribers, then they have even more requirements about what your videos that you're running ads on. They can't have certain things in them because they're not going to be appealing to advertisers if they do. if you violate certain terms of YouTube service, you can get strikes. The classic example is the copyright strike. If you start playing someone else's music, or I don't know, let's say that there's a really good Christian talk show, okay? And they're talking about a topic, and you decide to download the entire episode, cut out the portion about that topic you're interested in, and re-upload it to your channel verbatim. Not saying someone did that to our show, but someone did that to our show. That's a copyright violation. You can't take our content and put it on your channel any more than I could take your content and put it on our channel, all right? Doesn't work that way. Did upset me they got more views for our program on their channel than we did on ours, though. So anyway, if you violate someone else's intellectual property like that, you get a copyright strike. And when you get a copyright strike, there are certain penalties that can be faced. For example, you can be prevented from live streaming or posting for a week with the first strike. And then if you get 3 copy strikes or 3 strikes of any kind in 90 days, then your channel's gone. You're kicked off, you're permanently. You're off. That's why I am a stickler. People are always asking when we're doing things on our live stream, or whatever. I'm the music police. You know, like, do we have that? Because we have a license for certain things. Right. It's like, is that covered by our license? Is it not covered by our license? One policy that YouTube has had is they instituted this false claims policy that basically said what it has been is they felt that if you published false claims, and this specifically arose in the context of the election, and they were labeling as false any claims that the election was rigged. There was widespread, not small scale, but widespread voter fraud. If you made any claims like that, YouTube would say these were false claims. And if you published a video saying that, then you, at first, under the old policy, you'd get a warning. And then if you had to take that video down, and if either you didn't take the video down or you published another video making these false claims, then you could get a copyright strike, but you got the warning first. YouTube has just announced that they've changed that policy, and now there is no more warning. The moment you publish a video that YouTube decides violates their false claims policy, and it's my understanding this policy is broader than this, but it's arising right now in the context of the election, then you get a copyright strike right off the bat. So, since I started last time, it's your turn this time, Ben. What do you say about that one?
Well, we'll find out if we're still on the air in a minute. But, my question there, the thing that's really concerning for me is who determines what's a false claim, especially with something that's contended or contentious as the most recent election. I mean, obviously YouTube determines it, but how are we supposed to know if something is not verified yet, especially if it's an ongoing investigation? How do you, I mean, you can make a claim, a prediction. I mean, yeah, take case in point, something else we were looking at as a potential story was the prophet who claimed that Trump would win. Right. And so now he's since recanted and he's issued an apology. So is his initial video saying that Trump was going to win, was that a false claim? And so, you know, what it's kind of amorphous and vague. And so that has me a little concerned.
Yeah. I mean, a starting point, YouTube, private company, do they have the right to initiate, to do this? Sure they do. Legally speaking, we're not talking about that. Right. Now we're past that. Let's talk about the moral question, or what they should do, and whether people have the right to be upset about it. I'm kind of in your camp. If we're going down the line through these stories, okay, from the first one now to the second one. Mm-hmm. The first one, we were specifically talking about inciting acts of violence, right. All right? Now we're talking about, we just think something's not true. Right. And here's the position YouTube's in. They're not saying that even though it's coming up in the context of these particular claims, all right, they're not saying that the policy is limited to these specific claims about the election being voted right. for on the election. Because if they do that, then they're definitely getting all sorts of objections that it's viewpoint discrimination and all that. Mm-hmm. All right. What they're saying is this is just one example of violating this false claims policy. And I'm like, this one worries me a little bit more. And people will probably hate me for saying this. I don't think there was widespread voter fraud in the election, but the objections come up now. But leaving that aside, do I think that YouTube should be giving out strikes to channels that say there were. If those channels are advocating imminent violence, then yes, absolutely. If they're just trying to present their view that they think this voter fraud was out there, you're walking a real fine line if you're trying to say, therefore, we're going to give you a strike for saying that, because now you do have, your viewpoint police up there and you're right. Who's to say it's false? Any novel claim is going to be, by definition, unsupported until the evidence arises to support it. Mm-hmm. You want to go back to Watergate. If the internet had existed back then, YouTube existed back then, if somebody came up and said that they broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters, or I think they did that, I think we should look into this. And the investigation hadn't happened yet, and you published on YouTube your view. Then would it be right to say YouTube should suppress that and say you shouldn't express that viewpoint because we think it's false? Well, hold on. That's what the marketplace of ideas is for, and YouTube, like it or not, you're part of that marketplace of ideas. I may disagree with that claim, and I do disagree with that claim. But I think if you're going to be a platform that's designed for people to express and exchange ideas, like social media is, like YouTube is, then you shouldn't. You've got to be very careful about where you're cutting people off and not. And I think this might arguably cross that line.
Yeah, and the other question I would have is, who's to say again? What if new evidence comes forth that, say, somebody's platform, their channel gets taken down for a false claim strike, and then new evidence comes forth that supports that claim, so it's no longer a false claim. Does YouTube put them back up? Are they keeping track of the ones they take down? Most likely not. They're gone permanently. Just for the sake of argument, say, I don't know, the world was the go back to like centuries ago, the heliocentric model versus the geocentric model. If people were saying that the geocentric model is true, and then anyone's posting hypothetically, oh no, actually the Earth revolves around the sun, that's a false claim. Well, now we know differently.
I'm so going to create a meme with Ptolemy and Copernicus having their Facebook profiles arguing back and forth now.
Right. So what happens in that case?
Well, I'll give you a more modern example. And this is I guess a kind of a painful one, but we were talking last week about, was it last week? Yeah, we were talking about Ravi Zacharias.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Let's look back, not at the current issues that have come out, but let's go back to the earlier allegation for a couple years ago from the woman who was saying that he was exchanging inappropriate text messages with her and things like that. And they settled out of court with a gag order. But of course, what RZIM, their administrator at the time, was basically saying this isn't the Ravi we know. And they essentially denied it. Right. They settled denied it. Now, what if you had an editor on YouTube, someone from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries or sympathetic to them, that decides this claim is false, and it's slanderous against Ravi Zacharias, and so we're going to take this post down.
Right.
Well, lo and behold, what happened a few years later, all these other claims came out. It's going to be corroborated.
Yep.
And so that's the danger you face when you're trying to do something like this. And so YouTube, the false claims is just too, it always falls back to the question of who's deciding what's false and what's true.
Right. Just painting with a broad brush. And now even more so that the penalty is a lot more heavy-handed, that right. It's not a warning anymore, it's an immediate strike.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an even greater risk of that happening.
And I can give you an example of a real-life conversation I had with a Facebook friend, not more than a Facebook friend, I mean, he's a friend of mine not too long ago, where we were talking about the reliability of the scriptures. And he made a comment to me about, come on, Ken, I'm sure you agree, because everybody knows that the scriptures, they're filled with contradictions. And I said, actually, I don't agree with that. I don't believe that I think I'm an inerrantist. I do believe they're without error. I think, frankly, a lot of people who think there are contradictions don't understand the definition of the word contradiction. Mm-hmm. And I would also challenge your supposition that everybody, like all scholars, agree that this is the case. It's not true. The problem is when you make a claim like that, you're inevitably excluding Christian scholars for no reason other than the fact that they're Christian scholars. So you say, oh, they're Christians, so they must be biased on it. Well, wait a minute. If you actually came to the conclusion that the Bible was the inerrant word of God, what would you be?
Right.
You know? So
scholar.
basically,
Or
that you're
biblical scholar.
stacking the deck from the get-go. Well, that's the kind of thing that concerns me. Am I going to start getting, my apologetics videos and stuff like that, suppress strikes on YouTube for them because they're considered false claims when I say things like that.
Right. And how do you even exactly kind of going back to that? If we're talking about the metaphysical, how is that even? I don't know, verifiable, like to say that it's false or not. It's that whole old argument. Who's to say?
Now,
You know?
what happens if somebody does put information out there that, by and large, is false, like false statistics about, I don't know, it could be anything. Or let's take what happened last Wednesday. If somebody makes a video and posts it, and basically all the information they're given is not true.
Right. Then, I mean, I've been an advocate. Look, there's no perfect solution. It's just a matter of
I know that.
It's where you balance the priorities, I guess. But I've been an advocate for a long time on the show for the marketplace of ideas, and my default position is you combat bad ideas with good ones. And the answer to that, the answer to that, frankly, if you put somebody putting bad information out there, is you respond by putting good information. Does that mean that, I put out the accurate information, everybody's going to automatically believe it? Am I naive enough to think that, gee, Ken, you're an idiot because you think just because you put out good information, if you've got a very rhetorical person or gifted rhetorical, I can't talk today. Obviously, I'm not one. Orator, thank you. Gifted orator talking to a receptive audience, they're not going to listen to what the other facts are. They're hearing what they want to hear. Of course, that's still going to happen. All right. That's going to happen no matter what. All right. The question is the answer then to suppress their freedom or their ability to spread their message if it's not crossing that line into violence, which the first story we kind of talked about that there is a line. I'm not saying there's not a line. The question is where we're going to draw it. And I think if you're trying to draw a line based on false information versus true information, there's just too many ways that could go wrong. And I think there's going to be some risks. Yes, there's going to be some bad things, but I think we've got to take the good with the bad, or the bad with the good, as the case may be. And that's just, there's too much risk and bad stuff that could come of that.
Yeah, if YouTube it sees fit to take it upon themselves to police what's true and not, then it removes the possibility for the free access of or exchange of ideas and information, at least on this platform. But what it does broader in society, and of course society or culture is always upstream from politics, and so it has a far-reaching effect more than just what's on their specific platform. And even going back to the what's true or not, we could isolate it to Christendom, and you'd still have people on two different sides of the aisle on all sorts of things. Take rapture, pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. All three of them can't be true,
Right?
And the bottom line is it's prophecy. That's a realm that we can't really know for sure.
Is there a right way to baptize them? Sorry.
Well, there's another. We were just talking.
Right.
Yeah, Pastor Jay just said on this past Sunday.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's so many different rabbit holes and things, pitfalls that we can fall into.
Yeah. So I agree that it's going to be problematic. There's going to be some ridiculously stupid claims that get spread out there. But I think that's the price you pay for not suppressing things that you shouldn't. So just, and I admit part of my outlook on this probably is the fact that I've been I was a defense attorney back in my criminal law career. I worked for the public defender's office, and it's like innocent until proven guilty. Does that innocent until proven guilty, does that beyond a reasonable doubt standard that we use in criminal cases, does that mean that you're not going to be able to convict some people who are actually guilty? Yes, it does. But the question is, where's your priority? What do you put on a higher priority? Are you willing to accept the fact that you're going to possibly let some guilty people off in order to preserve the fact that you're not, or you're going to minimize your risk of convicting the innocent?
The integrity of the system has to maintain.
And so that it's a similar thing. It's just where do you put how do you balance that all out?
Right.
So, all right. Shall we move on to our third story?
Sure. Well, speaking of people disagreeing with one another about what is factual or not, this comes from, this particular article is through ChristianHeadlines.com, but it's been circulating all around. It actually originated on Twitter, where it was a...
I think we've hit every social media platform of the show now.
Yeah. Parlor.
Now we haven't done Discord. We haven't
Instagram.
We haven't done Instagram.
Yeah, that's true. We're getting there.
Next week will be Instagram week.
So there was a Lila Rose. I'm sorry.
Lila Rose, home again, Rose. You don't get? Do you get that?
I don't get that reference.
You don't get that.
Sorry.
The greatest musical of all time, The Music Man. Sorry, you have an assignment now. Now it's like 3 hours long, so put the kids to bed. But between now and next week, you have to watch The Music Man. Yes.
I'll find a streaming service that offers it. So anyway, Lila Rose.
Home.
Yeah.
Sorry.
She had her original tweet she had posted. There's this, the story revolves around this really only brief exchange between the actual persons in question, but it's gone further beyond them. But the original poster posted a simple sentence. She's pro-life. She said, "Abortion is violence." And she was responded to by a famous medical doctor, an OB, by the name of Leah Torres, who responded by saying, this is violent rhetoric. It is objectively false. There's that truth and
We'll get to that in a minute, yeah.
And meant to...
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. I'm sorry.
I know that reference.
You know that one. Okay.
I got that reference.
And I got that reference. For
those of you probably still lost right
Princess
now.
Bride, Avengers.
Yeah.
You're all caught up. There you go.
Let me explain. No, there's too much. Let me sum up.
Here's the road. We're way off it.
So anyway, in response to the original post of abortion is violence, Torres responded by saying, "This is violent rhetoric. It is objectively false and meant to incite others to commit crimes against clinics, patients, and healthcare providers. This is what domestic terrorism looks like." Before going into what some of the other people responding to, just leaving it at the original exchange, what do you think about that?
All right. First of all, do I believe that this OBGYN's tweet, Dr. Torres tweet, should have been suppressed and removed from Twitter? No. You know, I'm going to be consistent with what I'm saying. You know what? It's her view. She was not, despite the fact that she was calling it domestic terrorism and saying it's violent rhetoric, she was not crossing that line to what I talked to before. She was not advocating imminent lawless action to a receptive audience. All right. She wasn't saying, let's go attack Lila Rose. All right. So I don't think that. Do I think her comments are, I don't want to use the word ridiculous. Let's say, that's not charitable. Let's say less than, I don't know. I got nothing else, but
less than tolerant.
Yeah. I mean, yes. And here's where we get into my Princess Bride reference. You know, you keep using that word and I think it means what you think it means. She loves the word objectively. I know you said you weren't going to get into the responses yet, but she used that word in one of the responses too, when someone responded to her saying abortion is murder, murder is violence, ergo. And then she responded to that one, you're objectively wrong. You're using violent rhetoric. You're a misogynist. I won't read the rest of it. It goes very badly after that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go in.
Quick to label.
Yeah. But she keeps saying you're objectively wrong. It's objectively false. Like even the initial response where this is abortion is violence is it's objectively false. Let's take that for a minute. No, it's not. No, it's not. Objectively means that. Look, if there's objective is something, it's referring to the independent of anybody's opinion. All right. If I say insulin is a medication that is used to treat diabetes, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just drew a blank. I should know that. I know. Father-in-law, don't get me started. Hope he's not watching. Because I got to go home and give him his insulin injection tonight. But if I were to say that insulin is a medication used to treat diabetes, that is an objectively true statement. It doesn't matter whether I think that's true, whether you think that's true. It's not a matter of preference. It's an objectively true statement. Whereas if I say mint chocolate chip ice cream is the best flavor of ice cream,
That's a subjective statement.
I hate to, I mean, it pains me because I think it should be objectively true, but no, that's a subjective statement. It's a matter of preference. It depends upon the subject.
That is
Okay?
objectively false. Peanut butter cup is the best.
But that's a difference.
Chocolate chip cookie dough.
Does the truth for the statement lie in the object? In my last, that would be the ice cream, or in the subject, that would be the person saying it.
Right.
Which is in the ice cream one, it lies in the subject because it's my personal preference, and the insulin one, it lies in the object, the insulin, because that's true of the insulin whether somebody thinks so or not. All right.
Correct.
That's the difference between objective and subjective. It is objectively true that abortion is a violent act. I mean, it is. Now, there's subjective preferences, there's philosophical arguments about whether that violent act should be permitted or not. That's a different question. But it's kind of like saying, just because even if you're in a just war, or let's say that you've got a burglar breaks into your house and is threatening your family, and you pull out a baseball bat or a gun and you pummel them. All right. And that's like me saying that it's objectively false to say you're pummeling that burglar is a violent act. No, it's a violent act. It's objectively a violent act. Whether it's justified or not is a different question. So that was my first response to that. She just loves to use that word objectively. That's one of those things people throw out there all the time because they use it as like a point of emphasis. And it's like, but the moment you use that word like in context like she's using, if you're just throwing it out there to give added emphasis to your point, you might as well put a bulletin board on your head that says, I don't know what I'm talking about, because you're not using the word right. All right. You're not using the word right. And the other thing that I took from her original comment is when she says, and meant to incite others to commit crimes, blah, blah, blah. How on earth does she know that? And this is something that bugs me, whether it's, and I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. We all do this. I've seen it on both sides, and it annoys the heck out of me. And it's the tendency to ascribe motives to someone else. And you have no idea what their motive was. You have no idea what's going through their head, but it makes you feel better about your reaction to them if you can convince yourself that this is what they're really trying to do.
Baseless assertion.
Yeah.
It devolves into not only that baseless assertion, but also her other response that you quoted earlier that goes further than that. And when you don't know what you're talking about, then it quickly devolves into
my watch thinks I'm exercising now because I was getting so heated up on it. Sorry.
But yeah, that's classic. When people don't know what they're talking about, they'll be quick to place labels. And yeah, I agree with that. Obviously, the objective versus subjective. Clearly, she doesn't know the meaning of that word. And the other thing I thought, and this is just kind of peripheral, but it was very unprofessional, especially that other comment when she starts going on that rant.
Name calling.
Yeah. It just seems, I don't know. You expect a doctor to hold a certain level of decorum.
But I got to say, and
can I ask for a point of clarification?
Sure.
The first person who posted has no medical.
No, she's the founder of she's a pro-life activist from a organization called Live Action.
So we don't know if she has.
We don't know if she has it, and she certainly was posting it in that context of her advocacy for the pro-life position.
Right. And it was this response, the first response or the major response, I guess, that person is medically supposedly has a medical
She's
background.
An OB. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was, to be fair, my understanding from reading the article, it was not a direct response to that tweet. It was in response to that tweet, but it was a separate tweet that she put.
Right.
Did she retweet the original?
I don't know. It looks like she did. Yeah.
Use the
Now that I'm looking at this screenshot, it looks like she did.
She retweeted.
Yeah. Getting to your point, Ben, I do think we need to, call a spade a spade. I agree with you that, Dr. Torres's response, where she said you're objectively wrong, you're using violent rhetoric, you're a misogynist, you're most likely a white supremacist, and I won't say the last thing she said.
Right.
That was completely unprofessional and uncalled for. That being said, then you have someone responding to her saying what's more terrifying is how many stupid people have MD attached to their names. And so, I mean, we don't need to respond in kind.
No.
You know, you don't need to respond to kind to that kind of thing. That's letting your emotions get a hold of you and not letting Christ be. This is what we talked about at the very beginning of the show. There is a place for righteous anger, all right? Righteous being the operative word. And if it's just an emotional outburst and doesn't have that righteousness in mind, then that's not healthy, and that's not the way we should be responding.
I think the discernment we can glean here is from the Psalms that you like to reference, or Proverbs. Answer a fool according to his folly, and don't answer a fool according to his folly. In this instance, it might be best just to not answer the fool according to her folly.
Yeah. I mean, is there any point to it? It's like, I'm sorry, but I would like to think that most people who aren't already going to be persuaded and cheering on this doctor no matter what she says, most people look at these tweets and are just going to be like, whatever, and move on. And so you actually draw more attention to it. And hey, now I'm thinking about it, there's an argument made that we're doing the same thing by even covering the story. I mean, are we giving it more attention than it should? I don't know.
Well, my question here, and this is kind of what I thought of when reading her initial tweet, was there seems to be certain buzzwords in here, and looking at it in the broader context of our first two stories, if the YouTube algorithm or Twitter algorithm in this case is purposely trying to identify violent rhetoric, there seems to be a purposeful use of buzzwords here to get that person deplatformed.
Right.
The original poster deplatformed.
Could be.
To say that it is meant to incite others to commit crimes against clinics, patients, healthcare workers. This is what domestic terrorism. Those seems like violent rhetoric, domestic terrorism, meant to incite others to commit crimes. That seems very pointed.
Maybe, but I'll tell you, I think that's just the way politics works nowadays. And I don't mean politics necessarily just limited to a politician running for office. I mean this political mentality that we have permeating our country of us versus them. We demonize everybody on the other side. We demonize everybody who disagrees with us. And so a lot of that, like I said, I think arguably may be, and again, I'm not going to get into, violating my own standard and guessing and saying, this is what Dr. Torres meant by that. I don't know what she meant by that. But at least the way I took it, so now we're talking about me subjectively, was that it could just be, I see a lot of people do this and they're trying to convince themselves more than, again, they're trying to justify their anger and against somebody else by dehumanizing the people on the other side. And it's like a snowball rolling downhill. It's like she says this, and then a receptive ear hears this, and then they say it, and then they say it. And before we know it, we get in the situation where we've got so much division because everybody's dehumanizing the people on the other side rather than seeing them as human beings of value. And like it or not, God created mankind in his image, male and female, he created them. That's another topic for another story, but but we're created in God's image. There's a certain inherent value in all of humanity, and we as Christians need to see that. Doesn't mean you don't speak up for truth, doesn't mean you don't share the gospel, doesn't mean everybody's saved. I'm not saying any of that. But there is value, and I think we have a horrible tendency sometimes to try to remove that value from anyone we disagree with.
Absolutely, and I definitely agree with that, totally. And it leads me to think, could the same be said of what the original poster said, and that abortion is violent? Could the same be said in the sense that when we attach labels to somebody by calling them misogynistic, whatever, we dehumanize them, but by attaching labels to a person in utero, we dehumanize them, attach a label of tissue mass or whatever.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the point to, again, not reading motives into it, but that could be arguably part of the point to making a comment like abortion is violent.
Right.
Because we think of violence as being something that has to be committed against a human, against a being, and not so a human, it could be an animal, but a living being. And so by saying that, you're making the point that this is a living being with its own rights, and we should not be dehumanizing it, because you're absolutely right. One of the approaches that's often taken by the pro-choice community is to remove the humanity. I mean, one of the biggest philosophical argument is the personhood argument. We try to say, okay, it's a human being, because they can't deny that. Genetically, it is a human being, all right? But it's not a person. And you can have a human being who's not a person, and therefore they don't have rights and a right to life until they're a person. It is what we'll call it a depersonizing of the unborn.
So in that argument, and this is kind of going a little bit into left field, and
we already went off the road earlier.
kind of morbid too, but by that same argument, if a person is a human being yet not a person, if an embryo, for the sake of argument, if that embryo is a human being yet not a person, and the very literal, which is objectively true, the process of abortion involves dismemberment.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it a crime to dismember a corpse, which is a human being yet not a person?
I'm sorry, you're looking at me to give you a good answer because
I'm just.
I mean, that's yeah, and you also get into inevitable line drawing problems. Obviously, that wasn't the primary point of us talking about this story, but we could go on and on about some of the pro-life and pro-choice arguments. But you also end up into an inevitable line drawing. And I'll tell you, one of the maybe disturbing is not the right word, but I had a philosophy class in my seminary program last year, where one of the students, and I'm not going to say anybody by names, obviously, but one of the students was a Christian who was advocating for the fact that he didn't think there was anything wrong with abortion up through the first, I think he said like the first trimester, because he believed that God did not impart a soul until such time. And we've had a lot of arguments about that and how you still get into this impossible line drawing thing and biblical arguments about where the heck he got that viewpoint from. But the problem you have is, like I said, it's inevitable line drawing. If you try to say, or arbitrary line drawing, if you try to say, well, it's abortion's okay up to the first trimester. Well, why? What's so special about that? What is that's different about the nature of that being, the unborn, the day before, the day after, or viability? Well, the problem with viability is that it talks about the ability to survive outside the womb. That largely is a factor of the advancement of medical science. If I got somebody in New York City, they're going to be viable at an earlier age than someone who's in a non-industrialized country somewhere else. If I had somebody at the same stage of development, 50 years ago, that child wasn't viable. Nowadays, by our standards, they would be viable. Same stage of development, same kid. How does that make sense? So you get into these these very difficult line drawing issues with that.
Yeah, and I guess I bring that point up just to kind of circle back around to the bottom of this article, the very last thing that it says, and it kind of makes a stark contrast here, where they say, in a poll done by Quillette, author Steve Jacobs, he asked thousands of biologists when life begins. 96% of them said life begins with fertilization.
Yep.
As the usable responses began to come in, I found that 5,337 biologists, which is 96%, affirmed that a human's life begins at fertilization, with 244% rejecting that view. The majority of the sample identified as liberal, 89% pro-choice, and non-religious. In the case of Americans who express party different preference, the majority identified as Democrat.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that human life begins at fertilization. All right, and some people say, well, fertilization isn't a sudden moment. That's another red herring. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's kind of like when I witness a car crash. A car crash, may take a few seconds to actually transpire from start to finish. Does the fact that it takes a little bit of time to transpire mean that I can't say a car crash occurred?
Right.
You certainly know before it happened. You know after it happened. And so it's the same kind of thing. We know when fertilization has occurred, and at that point, it is a biological, scientific fact that's when human life begins. It is a human being. The unborn is a human being at that point, which is why you have to resort to these, personhood type arguments to try to get around that.
Yep.
And that gets into the dehumanization thing we were talking about, tie it all around. All right. We have to get on to our last story. And while we're getting on to our last story, I'm going to make a quick little plug. The reason we have to get so quickly on to our last story is because we have to get off the air before 7 o'clock, because 7 o'clock tonight, right here on this channel, not on this link, you'll have to go onto the channel and click the link for the next thing, but we do have a Bible study starting tonight. It's a 7-week Bible study, although it's going to take Ash Wednesday off.
Yep.
So it'll be over the course of 8 calendar weeks, but it's a 7-week, 7-session Bible study led by Bill Reerig on the life of Paul. It's a Zoom study, but it's also being live streamed right here on the channel. So I would encourage everybody to stay with us. Don't hang up on us. We got one more story to go over. But once we are done, stay here on the channel, click on the link for that Life of Paul Bible study. I think that's going to be really illuminating. If there was ever someone outside of Jesus that you really wanted to dig into that has a lot of meat to their story, it's Paul.
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be a great one. So I'd encourage everybody to watch that. Moving on to our last story, however, with all of these stories about social media and censorship and suppression and all that. We wanted to do something positive because I have to ride home in the car with my wife. And if I don't put a positive story in there, it's a very tense ride home. No, not really, but anyway. But this was a good one because I also like Tom Selleck. So I mean, he's a great actor. This is a story that it's funny. This article specifically is in the context of Tom Selleck doing this, but he's far from the only one to do it.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I don't know why
Not
they
even
chose
the first.
Right, not even the first. So I don't know why it was specifically Tom Selleck that chose to highlight. But, you know, everybody should know Tom Selleck. He's currently on the show Blue Bloods, plays the Commissioner Frank Reagan on Blue Bloods. I go back to Magnum P.I. Little known fact, he was originally cast as Indiana Jones, but then he couldn't do it because I believe it was because of his Magnum P.I. Contract and filming schedule, which is how it came down to Harrison Ford. And then, of course, he had a great guest starring run on Friends. But a great actor, very funny guy. He accepted what's called the 2020 Tip Challenge, and he gave a waitress a $2,020 tip with a note expressing sincere hope for the new year. His note actually said, "For Elios, I am honoring my dear friend, or my friend Donnie Wahlberg's tip challenge with my sincere hope for a better 2020. Thank you all." And the reason this came to light is not from Tom Selleck himself, but Donnie Wahlberg, who actually plays his son on the show Blue Bloods, and who was encouraging other celebrities to do this. In other words, the people that had the money to leave a $2,020 tip. I don't. So don't, I don't even go out to eat right now. So, but he was encouraged. He didn't start it. Donnie Wahlberg didn't start it, but he was encouraging other celebrities to do this in a time when, you know, COVID's really hard hitting on restaurant business, the restaurant business in particular. People aren't going out to eat. I'm not going out to eat. And so it's a way of supporting these restaurant workers. And they mentioned several other celebrities that have joined in and have done this. I'm trying to find them all here. Donnie Wahlberg himself, you know, did it himself. Harry Styles has done it. Jenny McCarthy has done it. So it's kind of, it's this thing. I didn't know it was a thing until I saw the story, but the 2020 Tip Challenge is a thing that's actually happening. What do you think?
Yeah. I know this is an uplifting thing, so I'm going to make this first comment brief. But on one hand, I'm super glad, and I'll get into the positive side of this because I think it's great. I just want to make one comment that I think it's kind of a sad commentary when generosity and basic human decency is newsworthy.
Yeah.
That being said, I think it's a great challenge, and I had to. This is specifically the 2020 Tip Challenge because I looked up like 2020 challenge, and there's all sorts of 2020 challenges, like people posting 9 pictures of me in, or 12 pictures me in January 2020 versus me in December 2020. It's like progressively worse looking pictures. But the 2020 Tip Challenge specifically is just a challenge to give back, to be generous, to pay it forward, basically. And you don't have to give a $2,020 tip. You can do, I've seen a lot of people, actually the majority of people that have been taking up this challenge are doing $20.20 on their
and that's what the waitress who was the original waitress who received the first one. That's what she did. She turned around and paid it forward with a $20.20 tip.
Right.
So, yeah.
Exactly. So no, I think it's just, it's encouraging that you know, people are still it's just basic human decency, I think, and I think it's good, and it's from a Christian perspective, you know. I think all the better if it's great that Tom Selleck is getting recognized for this, but all the better if, you know, when Jesus says, when you give in secret, don't let your left hand see what your right hand is doing, because it's that not for our recognition's sake, but for the sake of just spreading the love of Christ.
Yeah, that's the one thing that does leave me somewhat unsettled about it is, I mean, it wasn't Tom Selleck who broadcast this. It was not. But Donnie Wahlberg found out about it somehow. You know, how did he find out about it? I don't know the answer to that. And I guess I get Donnie Wahlberg publicizing the fact that these people are doing it because he's the one that started encouraging them to do it. And so he's trying to get, you know, being gracious, he's probably trying to get momentum going behind it. And so I see so-and-so's doing it, so-and-so, to get more people to do it. And I think that's a great thing. But I agree. It almost seems like I'd almost prefer just to know, yes, this is happening. Yes, people are doing it, and not need to know who's doing it, you know, because it's not about, sometimes I think in this life, in this world, we tend to think that, you know, we the motivation for doing good things is because of the recognition we can get out of it. And I think there's some people that do that. They'll do good things because they want to get that proverbial pat on the back, so to speak. If that happens, the question arises: are you doing it really because it's the right thing to do, or are you doing? There was a movie that did that. I thought there was a movie that addressed that.
Pay It Forward.
Was it Pay It Forward?
Yeah. With
I just remember a conversation
Kevin
somewhere
Spacey.
where they were talking about: are you really doing
Haley
it?
Joel Osment.
yeah, him.
Yeah, Haley Joel Osment. Was that discussion in there? But there's a conversation about whether or not, if you're doing it, are you really doing it for acting selflessly? Because if you do this, then you're going to get recognition for it, and you're going to like that recognition. So are you really doing it selflessly, or is it really a selfish act? I don't know. Now we're getting philosophical, but you're right. The point is, to do it, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. God knows what we do all the time, and I would just like to see more. But at the same time, I do like to see stories like this because they encourage people to go out and do things, and hopefully do it just so that God sees them doing it.
Right. And to clarify, I'm not judging anybody's motive.
No, absolutely.
Like you said, it's not, Tom Selleck wasn't the one promoting it. It's just gained traction, and I think that's just part of celebrity status that people attach themselves to celebrities anyway. So of course they would get the recognition from it, but I don't think any of them per se necessarily would do it for the clout or recognition. But again, I don't judge people's. Maybe they did. I don't know.
Yeah.
Intentions.
But it still helps somebody.
Exactly.
You know what?
The bottom line is that people still were getting.
You can be a scumbag. I don't care, but you help somebody. I'm happy the person got help.
Right.
Right. So that's.
I think that's. I was just reading this and it stuck with me. It said the small. What is it? Let's see if I get this right. The smallest action is better than the biggest intention.
Yeah.
So even just giving a $2.20 tip is better than the biggest saying, "Oh, I'm gonna," and then not doing anything. So
yeah, absolutely. So what time have we got? We got 6:39. We got 21 minutes, so we have to be off the air. I don't think we need to vamp for 21 minutes. I will say that I know there's people out there watching. Apparently, y'all weren't talkative tonight, and that's fine. You don't have to be. If anybody wants to at least say hi on the comment section so we know this little comment board over here works. It's been empty all night. And it's funny because last week...
They don't want YouTube to kick them off.
They comment on Facebook. Theoretically, Facebook should show up over there too. Then maybe Facebook will kick off. I don't know. Anybody wants to at least say hi while we're signing off so we can see if that works? I wouldn't be opposed to that idea. Someone on YouTube, someone on Facebook. Let's see if this technology worked over here. You can go ahead. You're gonna type a comment on there, see if it actually works. So it's funny because you never know. Like last week, what? Don't bring up your volume. What are you doing? You're typing your comment. This is a sad state, ladies and gentlemen. In order to get comments to show up on our feed over here, we here in the studio are commenting ourselves. So let's see. Mary Kay Coughlin as Trinity Joppa said hi to our viewers on Facebook. And did that show? And did that show? Can you see? Did that show up on the actual? Well, I typed it. Yeah, it's showing up where I typed it. Right, but it was showing up on the screen. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm like 20 minutes late over here. I can't see it yet. So, anyway, yeah. Ben, did you just type something too?
No, I didn't yet.
Why not?
Because Mary
she
Kay
did Facebook. You do YouTube.
Oh, that was Facebook.
That's the whole point. To see. Because I've got Facebook open in front of me. I can see your post on Facebook. I don't know what it says. So I can't read that from here. Well, that's who you are. No, it's just funny that last week we had, all the comments were coming through on Facebook, and of course that was the one thing we didn't have here visible that was showing up. Right. And Ben Lander says, "Hi, us." I see that now. Did it show up? Has it shown up there yet? On your screen? It has. Well, there we go. We have a successful test. We are pretty sad and pathetic that we have to talk to ourselves via the comment section. I responded to Ben. So, all right. On that note, I think we should sign off and tell people
before it gets more sad.
Yeah. Bill's study at the top of the hour is going to be far more entertaining, obviously, than this show was. Feel free to join that one. Like I said, you can watch that on the YouTube channel. You can comment in the live chat during that live stream. And we'll have Lori Hinman, I think, is going to be monitoring the live stream, so she'll be able to give any questions to Bill that he can answer for you, etc. So please feel free to 7 o'clock, top of the hour, The Life of Paul, Week 1 study right here on the channel. Tune in, watch that. I'm going to go eat dinner. All right. So thank you, Mary Kay. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, all you out there in internet land. And thank you to everybody who commented on the show today. See you next week. God bless. What are you doing? Fade to black.